So, Martin, let's talk about the North.
So this is the sort of cold, grim place north of Milton Keynes, right? There's a big wall, I understand, and some angry people talking about dragons or dead people. That's pretty much my experience.
Something like that, Martin. So, a regular storyline on our show is about how the North usually gets a pretty raw deal. It's a combination of the structural decline of industry, the concentration of political power in London. Everyone knows the story, the lack of regional rebalancing, the lack of levelling up, despite a lot of talk about it, that's left the North significantly poorer than the South.
Yes, and of course, let's not talk about infrastructure. So we all remember Rishi Sunak bravely going to Manchester, standing up and immediately cancelling the northern leg of HS2. Quite why he decided to go there and do it, not entirely sure. Maybe just to sort of wind people up.
Yeah, I think that's lost to time now. So that's just the start of it, though. We've talked on this show as well about Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is this big plan that's been around for ages now that wants to improve rail connections between Manchester, Liverpool, and across the Pennines. The plans have been on the drawing boards for literally ages.
Yeah, they've had about 17 different names over the years. I think Rachel Reeves said at the spending review last June that she'd be announcing something soon, which is sort of a little while ago now.
Yeah, so there was one line in the spending review where she mentioned Northern Powerhouse Rail. It seemed like a bigger announcement about either government funding or some sort of plan to actually deliver it was imminent. There was then reporting that it was going to be announced at Labour conference. So far, nothing has happened yet. Maybe there'll be something in the budget in a few weeks' time. But yeah, it's just been constantly, seemingly getting delayed again, just like it always has done. And it's the North getting screwed again.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, James, there's plenty of money for everything that we want to do. But, just in case the worst should happen, how do we stop the North getting constantly overlooked?
I'm glad you asked, Martin, because this week I want to pitch you my big plan for this. I think Manchester should bid to host the 2036 Olympic Games, which is the next one that's available to be bid on.
So this is, I would say, even by the standard of your usual crazy schemes, quite a stretch in the sense that it is in the north, and you are very much a southern London man, and it's about sport, which I think it's fair to say you're not what I would consider to be a sporting gentleman. You're not really into the footballs or the crickets or even the snooker. So what's brought this on? Have you had a funny turn?
That's true. Though I do actually really like the Olympics, Martin. This is an aside, but the reason I like the Olympics is because most Olympians, they seem like sort of normal people. So, whenever you see someone winning
Yeah,
gold for being
because jumping 5 meters in the air, James, and running 10 100 meters in 9 seconds, totally normal stuff. Or
but
falling off of a 50-meter diving board. Like, I mean, if there's one thing about the Olympics, James, it is that they are deeply, deeply average people taking part who we can completely relate to. But anyway, sorry.
See, Martin,
Carry
this,
on.
this this is why I see everything through the lens of class. Because apart from those sailors who are all private school poshos, the other people, when the person who wins the gold for being best at BMX or when canoeing or something, you're probably watching them have like the best, greatest moment of their lives. It's not like watching millionaire footballers who earn £100,000 a week faff about on the pitch and go away and to their sports car and their mansion and stuff like that. But anyway, aside from that, Martin, even if I hated the Olympics, right? I'd still think Manchester bidding is a good idea because what's useful about the Olympics is that it's like a concentrating event. There's a specific date that we set sometime in the future, and we say, in this date, in this fairly distant time, this massive, massive, important event is going to happen and everyone's going to pay attention to it. And so politicians will panic. They know that by this date, they've got to align their incentives. They've got to deliver stuff. They've got a huge incentive for it to be successful. And they want the games to happen because if it doesn't, it will be hugely embarrassing and the eyes of the world will be on them. It's a great sort of mechanism for cutting through the sort of normal sort of political drudgery that happens.
So I guess the question, though, would be why Manchester? Because if anything, if we look at the last 10, 15 years, Manchester and indeed Birmingham, which is sort of near Manchester, relatively speaking for us in the south, they've been doing pretty well. There's been a lot of development, a lot of growth there. Manchester, some of that comes from improvements to its public transit as well. Weren't there already plans to redevelop the area? Why do we need the Olympics as well?
So clearly something is still not quite working in and around Manchester, hence why Northern Powerhouse Rail seems to be still struggling on, even if it does get announced, even if the funding does get put up, even if Rachel Reeves comes out into the Commons waving a flag saying Northern Powerhouse Rail, it's still going to take, a decade or more to deliver. And in that time, politics happens, as we've seen with HS2. Things can get cut and shrunk and disappears, and things can go away. So you need that sort of commitment mechanism to actually make it happen. It's a bit like how on the side of my fridge I've got a whiteboard where I mark off whenever I do exercise, and that is try to make me commit to it. The problem with my plan in this case is it's on my fridge, which means sort of balances out a bit. But in principle, you need that sort of commitment mechanism, and we've also got evidence that this sort of works because, well, look at 2012. Look at what London did then. Because before 2012, that bit of East London where the Olympic Park is now, it was basically this just, horrible, toxic canal.
I think it's called the Thames, James.
No, there's two of the canals that go through the Olympic Park, which were horrific. They had to sort of, I was going to say, what's the word? De-stink them. They had to make them nice. That's a scientific term. I should ask my partner's sister-in-law. She actually worked on doing that, about what the actual scientific term is. Anyway, it was former industrial land, and they took that and they turned it into this thriving new district in London. And at the time, Ken Livingstone, the former mayor of London, a controversial figure in retrospect, the one thing he did say, which is absolutely right, I think, he said, I didn't bid for the Olympics because I wanted 3 weeks of sport. I bid for the Olympics because it's the only way to get the billions of pounds out of the government to develop the East End, to clean the soil, put in the infrastructure and build the housing. And 2012, as we know, was really, really successful. So I used to live in a big gentrifying tower that looked over the Olympic Park. It was amazing. I had this amazing view. But over the time I lived there, the 4 years I lived there, I was watching sort of new neighbourhoods and towers rise in and around the park over the distance. There was just cranes everywhere and you could see stuff being built. And it's taken over a decade now. 2012 was a horrifyingly long amount of time away now. But almost every parcel of land around the Olympic Park now has dense housing on it, loads of blocks of flats. It's brilliant. And it's one of the best connected places in London. And the games catalysed the extension of the Docklands Light Railway and the London Overground, and all this housing that was stimulated and put there that added to the case for building the Elizabeth line. So it was just a phenomenally successful project. So I just want to see some of that in Manchester, basically.
So my favourite little fact about the Olympic Park is that when they were building the Olympic Stadium, as I think we've mentioned before, they realised that there had previously been a nuclear reactor on the site, which was sort of a little hobbyist reactor being run apparently in a university science department, because apparently in the 60s there were just, nuclear reactors lying all over the place. But okay, so I think I'm sold in principle. I do feel that we've attempted to do a podcast segment about Manchester, and yet somehow we're talking about London and the view of the poor and huddled masses that you had from the top of the ivory tower that you lived in, James. But moving up north again, could Manchester actually do this? London 2012 cost about, I think, £9 billion. That's sort of 90 bat tunnels, and famously we're not particularly loaded at the moment. So is this realistic?
Yeah, so I just think there's a really big opportunity for Manchester here. I do recommend going to watch a friend of the pod, City Ed's latest video. He's done a whole documentary about how Manchester has sort of revived itself over the last 20 years or so. I think the phrase is something like Manchester Council was basically a property developer with a local council attached to it or something. There's been so much development going on there. And like I say, I think as a sort of concentrating mechanism, this can really help, because the private money can flow in and build stuff and can build housing and other things Manchester needs. And I think, frankly, when it comes to hosting an Olympics, though it's historically thought of as an expensive thing, I don't think it needs to be as expensive as it perhaps once was. So I think, 2012 cost something like £9 billion, but things have changed a lot since then. So there's been a bit of a cultural shift in how the Olympics is viewed. So because basically it got so expensive with Sochi and things like that, it's basically put cities off bidding for the Olympics. And so the Olympic Committee, they sort of lowered their expectations a little bit. So Los Angeles, they won the 2028 Olympics, partially because they weren't planning to build many new venues. Most of the stuff already exists. The main events like athletics and stuff, they're going to take place in the Memorial Coliseum, which was actually used in the 1984 1974 games. You'll recognise it from photos. It's quite an iconic stadium. And then the 2032 Olympics, the one before the Manchester Games, which I'm going to talk about like it's definitely happening, was actually won by Brisbane in Australia, which is a tiny little city by Olympic standards. It's like 2.4 million people. That's actually smaller than the population of Greater Manchester. And if you look at Manchester as well, then like LA, it's already got most of the things you need for the Olympics. It's got the Etihad Stadium, where Manchester City play. That was built for the 2002 Commonwealth Games, and I think it was reconfigured a bit for football from athletics, but I dare say it's within the capabilities of humans to turn stadium into a slightly different type of stadium. That seems a very doable thing to me.
In fairness, James, the ancient Romans were able to flood the Colosseum and have ships floating inside it. So I feel like if they could do that 2,000 years ago, it sets a pretty high bar for doing football on an athletics track.
Exactly. Why not have the swimming events in that stadium as well? That seems like a great idea. But
Yeah.
just across the way from the Etihad Stadium, there's like a velodrome that was like the best velodrome in the country until 2012. I think like Team GB cycling team or whatever, they all train up there. It's got two of the largest arenas in the country in Manchester, where you can do all of the smaller events where it can sort of go anywhere, like fencing or volleyball or something, because there's the Manchester Arena, there's the Co-op Live Arena, which has just opened, the two sort of largest arenas in the country. And then in addition to this, we could probably get away with reusing lots of like London 2012's venues. So, in the Paris Olympics, the one that just happened, they had the surfing in Tahiti. Now, I don't know if you looked at a map, but that's a very long way away from Paris. So I reckon if we said to the Olympic Committee, well, we'll have the main Olympics in Manchester, but let's do the rowing back in Windsor, where we did it in 2012. I think they'll probably be fine with that. And, there's lots of other places in Manchester as well that could be used. One I'm particularly keen on. I've not been there, but looking at it visually, it really is quite striking. It's called Depot Mayfield. I reckon you could put the skateboarding here and it'll have a proper sort of gritty sort of former industrial unit. It'll be like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but in real life. You could put let's put the breakdancing there as well. That'd sort of work. Or maybe you could put it in a temporary venue and call it the Hacienda, because it would be like resonant with Manchester history. And then basically all you need to do is get Oasis back in for the opening ceremony, and job done. You've got an Olympics, and then that's the concentrated mechanism. And then you get all the other stuff built, because everyone thinks, shit, we need to get our shit together before the Olympics.
And of course, speaking of the opening ceremony, this is where the French have given us a really helpful boost, because as for most of their history, they've set such a spectacularly low standard with their frankly baffling opening ceremony last year. I think not one of the highlights of any Olympics, that really anything that we could do in Manchester would look quite good in comparison to that, I suspect. So, realistically, James, do you think this is going to happen?
I don't know. I think if Andy Burnham wants to cause a bit more trouble and get, put his head above the parapet again, he could kick off and make this a conversation that's actually had by people in power. I'm hoping that because bidding is still open, if I talk about it on a podcast that I know is listened to by policy people, maybe it'll plant the idea in someone who knows what they're talking about's head, and they can turn this into a real thing. Surely this seems just like an obvious thing to me. Manchester, it is a major city. It's a pretty big city. It should be able to host an Olympics. It's got loads of culture attached to it. It's famously got a big sporting culture around it. So, let's have the Olympics there, anchor a load of development, and basically use it as the ultimate insurance policy, so that finally all these developments, like Northern Powerhouse Rail, actually get delivered. Let's make it happen.